Here's what Judge Samuel Alito had to say during his 2006 Supreme Court confirmation hearings on the issue of judicial ethics.
I not only complied with the ethical rules that are binding on federal judges, and they're very strict, but also that I did what I've tried to do throughout my career as a judge, and that is to go beyond the letter of the ethics rules and to avoid any situation where there might be an ethical question raised.
I don't just comply with ethics rules. I go above and beyond. If you look closely at that video, you can see the woman sitting behind Samuel Alito in an aquamarine top with a ruffled collar. That is Martha Ann Alito, the person who 18 years later is at the very center of Justice Alito's current ethics scandal. 2 weeks ago, the New York Times broke the story that the Alitos had an upside-down American flag, a symbol of the January 6th insurrection, flying over their home in the days after January 6th. Justice Alito responded by pointing the finger at his wife, Martha Ann, saying she flew the flag as part of a dispute with neighbors. Then the Times discovered yet another flag associated with the insurrection flying at Justice Alito's vacation home. Alito did not immediately offer an explanation. Now today, Justice Alito has broken his silence on that second flag, once again pointing to his wife and declaring that he will not recuse himself from any January 6th related cases. In 2 letters to Democrats in Congress, Justice Alito writes, "My wife is fond of flying flags. I am not. A reasonable person who is not motivated by political or ideological considerations or a desire to affect the outcome of Supreme Court cases would conclude that this event does not meet the applicable standard for recusal." It should be noted here that many reasonable people, including ethics experts and a sitting federal judge, have said that indeed it does meet the standard for recusal. But anyway, Alito's defiance comes as we are learning new details about the first insurrectionist flag incident. The Times reports that after January 6th, a woman in her 30s who lived with her mother and boyfriend near the Alitos put up signs that read, "Trump is a fascist and you are complicit." Not long after, the woman's mother took the signs down, fearing they would attract unwanted attention. Then, on the day President Biden was inaugurated, the couple drove by the Alito's home, where they say Martha Ann Alito was standing outside. Here's what the New York Times says happened next. Miss Alito ran toward their car and yelled something they did not understand. The couple continued driving, they said, and as they passed the Alito home again to exit the cul-de-sac, Miss Alito appeared to spit toward their vehicle. The next month, the conflict reignited. Quoting from the Times again, the woman and her boyfriend were pulling in trash bins when the Alitos, who seemed to be on a stroll, appeared. Mrs. Alito addressed the pair by name, used an expletive, and called them fascists, the couple told the Times, and said in texts at the time. Justice Alito remained silent, they added. The Alitos began to walk away. That was when the woman snapped, she said. She does not remember her precise words, but recalls something like, "How dare you behave this way? You've been harassing us over signs. You represent the highest court in the land. Shame on you." The woman then called Martha Ann Alito an expletive that I cannot say on television, and the younger couple later reported the incident to the police. So Justice Alito's wife, standing alongside the justice, was publicly berating neighbors over political disagreements over Donald Trump and January 6th. And then she flew insurrectionist flags over Justice Alito's house without his objection. And Justice Alito now says, whatever, my wife loves flags. No need for me to recuse myself from the 2 major cases I'm hearing about January 6th and Donald Trump. Today, Republicans celebrated Justice Alito's refusal to recuse from this case. The man in question in all of this, Donald Trump, congratulated Alito on social media for showing the intelligence, courage, and guts not to recuse himself. Earlier this month, the New York Times was the first to report that in January 2021, an inverted American flag was flown at Justice Samuel Alito's home. But the Washington Post was the first to learn about the appearance of that Stop the Steal symbol back in 2021, 3 years prior to the Times report. The Post says it chose not to report on it because the flag raising appeared to be the work of Martha Ann Alito rather than the justice. But the Post also notes that in 2021, when their reporter visited the Alitos to ask about the flag, Mrs. Alito yelled, "It's an international signal of distress." Justice Alito then intervened and directed his wife into a car parked in their driveway. The justice denied the flag was hung upside down as a political protest, saying it stemmed from a neighborhood dispute. Martha Ann Alito then got out of the car and shouted in an apparent reference to the neighbors, "Ask them what they did." After getting back in the car, she exited again and then brought out from their residence a novelty flag, the type that would typically decorate a garden. She hoisted it up the flagpole. "There, is that better?" she yelled. Joining me now is Mark Joseph Stern, Slate Magazine's senior writer covering the courts and the law. Mark, thank you for being here. What strikes me in all of these anecdotes is the fact that Justice Alito is there as his wife is allegedly spitting at neighbors, running novelty flags up, saying specifically that it's a symbol of distress used by insurrectionists. I mean, he knew all of this was unfolding, and he seems acutely aware of the import that the flag was flying over a house that he owns, because he goes out of his way to say that the beach house was not actually owned by him, but part of his wife's property.
Yes, and he bristles with hostility towards Senate Democrats for even asking questions about the insurrectionist flags that hung over his family's property. I think it's remarkable that Justice Alito has discovered the one woman in America who deserves a right to privacy, and that appears to be his wife. This letter today is an escalation of the conflict. I think Justice Alito is very much thumbing his nose at Congress. He is essentially trolling Congress, telling them that this business has really nothing to do with him or any matter of importance because it's just his wife and he has no control over his wife. Of course, ignoring what you just noted, which is that these are also his properties. Now, he claims that he was unable to stop his wife from flying these flags. I think that's questionable. He's not exactly a pushover. But either way, you know, this is clearly at this stage a matter of public concern. And yet he, again, sounds aggrieved that the public cares. He seems to be saying in this letter the real offense here isn't the flags that flew over his house that signified insurrection and support for January 6th, but that anyone would dare to even look into this matter, let alone ask for his recusal because of it. And that certainly does not align with what he said during his confirmation hearings, as you showed in a clip. It's not how judges are supposed to comport themselves.
Yeah, and that 2006 confirmation hearing tape that we played in the last segment introducing this one is so remarkable because not only does he say he respects and complies with ethics, but that he goes above and beyond. I wonder if you could talk about the transformation of Justice Alito from 2006 to the present in terms of, you know, his sense of grievance.
Yeah, so I think a part of it is that when he joined the court, he and John Roberts were very close. And when John Roberts defected in the first Obamacare case, it seems like that broke something in Alito. And Alito started drifting right toward the Clarence Thomas wing of the court and started to view, I think, progressives and Democrats really as an enemy of the people, you might say, started to vote party line and seeming to relish sort of owning the libs. That's come through more and more in his jurisprudence, especially under Trump. I think he is very much a MAGA justice, and that might have some positive consequences in driving away the less extreme conservatives. But I think it's a humiliation for the Supreme Court. I think there's a reason John Roberts is staying silent despite Senate Democrats begging him to meet with them or speak out, because he's embarrassed by this as well. Alito has become an internationally notorious symbol of flagrant lawlessness. He's a judge and troll in robes, and he just seems to relish every opportunity he can to stick it to Democrats. Again, not how you build confidence in a Supreme Court that relies exclusively on support from the people and faith in its abilities to have any power or wield any authority at all.
Okay, let's talk about Roberts, speaking of humiliations. I mean, we haven't heard from him, as you note. Will we? I mean, do you have any sense of the dynamics that are unfolding behind the scenes from the Chief Justice as it concerns other justices on his court?
My sense is that John Roberts has given up here. He's not in control. Frankly, he hasn't been since Justice Ginsburg died, right? He doesn't even have a majority that he can sort of herd toward particular positions. And I think for the last year or so, he's been missing in action on the institutional front, too. He's no longer the John Roberts who would sometimes kind of stand up for the Supreme Court as a neutral arbiter of balls and strikes, you might say. He's been voting and writing like a rather extreme partisan lately. It's almost as if he's gravitating heading back toward where Alito has been for so many years now. It's really disturbing to witness because John Roberts is really good at providing the sense that he's the adult in the room, right? Even when the Supreme Court justices are mostly squabbling among each other and kind of embarrassing themselves, John Roberts, during oral arguments even, is really good at stepping in and saying, let's restore some order here, let's act like adults. But that guy seems to be gone, and I'm not sure if it's because he wants to sort of circle the wagons around his colleagues because he feels that they're being unfairly targeted, or he's just too embarrassed for words to speak up in defense of them. But it does seem like he is completely missing in action, and without him at the helm, it's hard to see how the court's not going to steer itself straight into a shipwreck in the final weeks of this term.
Yeah, it's Ginny Thomas and Martha Ann Alito's court now, I guess. That's where we're at. Mark Joseph Stern, always great to hear from you, my friend. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks so much, Alex.